well. And I hope that by the end of this video, I can convince you also that reverse grids are not the evil that everyone seems to think they are.
If you're an advocate for reverse grids,
Yeah.
you are expecting that the element of surprise will make the racing more entertaining. We have to separate the entertainment value from the championship value, right? Purists like us will say, no, don't do it. Why? Because it affects the drivers' championship. It could affect the constructors' championship, and we want that to remain pure, the championship aspect of it. But if you're on the side of entertaining racing, this is absolutely a great concept.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Tide F1 Pod with me, Shez, and you, Ammar. How are you doing, mate?
We're back. We're back, man. We're back for another one. We're still about a week out, no?
Yeah, we've still got a week. This is the middle week of the summer break, and man, we have been inundated with interesting topics to talk about. Or have we?
It's very interesting right now, watching all the drivers take their summer breaks.
Oh my God, it's been tumbleweed central, but we've picked out a couple of things to have a little chat about from the past week. And the first one I wanted to talk about was a little interview that Stefano Domenicali, um, CEO of uh, F1 at the moment for Liberty Media, he did the interview with motorsport.com, and he had this to say about reverse grids. Ready? He said this. We can really once again discuss if there is the need to reverse the grid or half of the grid, like what F2 and F3 is doing. Personally, I would say why not? It's a lot of action. It is overtaking. You're fighting for points. Some people can say, oh, it is a fake way of racing. Fake? There's nothing fake related to what you believe is the right format to produce great action. So I would be interested to discuss that again. Yes. Oof.
Yeah,
Reverse grids. Reverse
before
grids, Amar.
before we get into the gist of what he was saying, don't you find it amazing that he kind of in his statement took the opposing point and then he was like counterpoint to the counterpoint. If somebody calls it fake, it's as if he did a focus group study, or if he got into a room with people who dislike the idea and they're like, oh, how do I combat that? And this is what I'm going to say.
Yeah, that's probably because if you rewind this about 5 or 6 years, Stefano was that guy saying reverse grids. What are you talking about? This is Formula One. We don't do reverse grids. So he's just arguing with a younger version of himself, I think. But we're gonna have a little chat about this as well. And I hope that by the end of this video, I can convince you also that reverse grids are not the evil that everyone seems to think they are. But I digress. Amar, what are your initial thoughts? Are you like, yeah, reverse those grids, or are you more, no way, I don't want to dilute the purity of Formula One.
Yeah, to be honest with you, I am caught in between. Like, I see the need to do something spectacular. Look, it was not too long ago that we were debating the idea of having sprint races. So it's not uncanny for Stefano to come up with this idea as a precursor to what I think will happen a year or two out now. It's a question of when, not if, right? That's what we're talking about. Because by doing this interview, Stefano is simply laying the groundwork for something like this to happen sooner rather than later. Like, that's all that there is, because this is not a new conversation. This is not something that has been talked about. So on the one hand, the F1 purist in me does not want to have something like this happen. But then again, that same F1 purist did not want to have sprint races happen. On the other hand, I've seen how exciting sprint races have been. So I can see reverse grids working in
Have
certain
they?
yeah, they have been exciting. The sprint weekend comes up with a lot of, I mean, look, maybe the sprint race by itself is not exciting, but the idea that you kind of jumble things up a little bit,
But
teams
what's
don't
the
know what to do
jumbling
with,
up?
well, because you're arriving at a weekend not knowing what to do with car setups. If teams are bringing upgrades, you don't know how they're going to go. And so there's an element of that to it, right? It's certainly better in some cases than watching practices. So I think we can agree
I
on that.
I
So
think that's
that's
the
just it.
only that's the
That's the
only
Well, we
advantage of
now have
having a
six
sprint
of those,
weekend.
right? There's a quarter of those happening. What's to say if another six races could not have reverse grids? Or maybe I would say take it a step further and make the sprints reverse grids if you really want to do that and see if that works out. So I'm not fully opposed to the idea, but I do think the pushback would come where there's a dilution coming your way in terms of the drivers' championship. And I'm going to argue that that by itself is fine. I don't think we need it right now.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I guess we're coming at this at a time when actually the racing's pretty good. There's a bunch of teams at the front that are all pretty equal, but we're never going to be that far away from another season like 2023 or the first part of 2024 where one team just ran off into the distance. And my argument would be that qualifying in the format that we have right now actually compounds that. It makes that situation happen. It makes it worse. And actually, if you're trying to combat the problems that we were having last season, where one team was just running off with every single race win and, in the middle of the season was running off with every qualifying session as well, then actually reverse grids are actually quite a good antidote to that. Now, I'm not saying that we should dump the entire weekend and use a reverse grid for the actual Grand Prix. But if we have got sprint weekends, rather than just doing a straightforward qualifying for the sprint and then a sprint race, perhaps the way to do it would be to sack off any qualifying for the sprint race and just have a reverse grid sprint race. Right? You keep FP1, keep FP2, but then have a reverse grid sprint race and then have qualifying proper and a proper Grand Prix.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think we can get into the machinations of what could be exciting or not. There's many different ways to do that, right? And we can probably come up with a subset of ideas that would make it interesting. I mean, for one, it would be nice to kind of have those reverse grid weekends be a little bit of an unknown, like a surprise reverse grid weekend where teams don't know that up until, qualifying is over and something like that. I mean, we can come up with all of that. I think the crux of the question is, to what extent can you fiddle around with the format of the race grid, right? To where you can say, okay, we've now reached a threshold where we're probably influencing the outcome of the drivers'
Okay.
championship and perhaps even the team. So that's the question. And I think at this point you're not there, right? Right? Because you have now 6 sprint races, right? Which not too long ago seemed like a pipe dream in some cases, right? We only started off with a couple, 3, I think, and then we doubled them up, right? So I think you could see another
But
maybe
Amar,
2
they've,
or 3 of those.
but Amar, they've already reduced the influence of the sprint race on anything drivers or constructors championship related because we're now not we're now not using the sprint race to dictate the starting grid for the Grand Prix proper.
Mhm.
Now it's just you just do the sprint race as a standalone thing. Yes, you get some points, and yes, that may have an influence on the drivers' championship at the end. But make that a reverse grid, and I think that makes it even more exciting. I want to talk about that influence thing because we're coming back to this idea that reverse grids are somehow fake. Can you tell me why qualifying with the fastest person at the front of the grid is any less fake than just reversing the championship order?
Yeah,
And,
I
and that's
cannot.
what we're talking about. It's not qualify and then stick the slowest person at the front of the grid. That's not what I'm saying because there would be no point in having qualifying if that's what you're going to do. What I mean is scrap qualifying for a sprint race completely and just use championship order to dictate the grid. Sorry, yes. So what is less fake about using the fastest driver to be at the front of the grid?
It depends on your perspective, right? I mean, one could argue that if you're the fastest driver, as in when Max was in 23, he could have started 20th and it would not have made a difference. He would have been winning the races in maybe, I don't know, 10 instead of 5 laps.
More exciting
He'd
to
be up
watch, though,
front.
right?
Maybe it depends. So I think the excitement is in the margins, right? If you're going to have a dominant car driver, they're probably not going to be affected by that a whole lot unless they decide to be super aggressive at the first turn of the first lap, right? Like other than that, I think a driver like Max could have waited out a lap or two and overtake. Didn't he start 14th in Belgium one of those Grand Prix weekends, and it didn't matter?
2022.
Yeah, what was it? So it didn't matter. So I think you have your answer there. I think the question is, can you make the racing exciting more towards the midfield, right? Now, that's kind of what you're talking about. You're really talking about P5 through P15 because you're going to lose out people on the extremes, right? The quicker drivers, quicker cars will make up whatever they need to, and it's fine unless you have a heated battle right now like McLaren and Red Bull have. Look,
Yeah.
it would have been interesting, I would argue, to have reverse grids right about now, right, for the remainder of the season. Do reverse grids now, and then you tell me if Max can still win the championship or not.
Yeah,
Maybe,
I mean,
maybe
yeah,
not, right? So
I don't love it for the actual for an actual Grand Prix. I thought I did, but I'm not a big fan of it for the actual Grand Prix. It's just
so
too big of a change for me. That's my problem. I don't look. I think we're going to talk about we're going to have a little chat in a second about the midfield. But one of the arguments that I think a lot of people in the comments are going to make is, well, look, you are randomizing the grid. You're making it easier for slower teams. You're giving them a leg up when they shouldn't have one. If you're the best, you should just be at the front. I would say that actually qualifying the way that it is at the moment, just sticking the fastest driver at the front of the grid is just as arbitrary as reversing the championship order. If you want a bit of history, the first time it was done was the 1933 Monaco Grand Prix. So before the championship was
yeah, I mean, we can't.
even a thing. And they did it because they had no other way of organizing the grid. They just thought, well, what order do we put people in? Because before it was just picking names out of a hat. So they said, all right, we'll just
Well,
qualify on the Saturday, and on the Sunday we'll stick everybody in pace order. The problem that then brings you though is that how can you expect to have a race that isn't just won by the person that's at the front?
okay. Yeah, but I think your premise is wrong in this. And but by doing this, you're taking, if you're an advocate for reverse grids,
Yeah.
you are expecting that the element of surprise will make the racing more entertaining. We have to separate the entertainment value from the championship value, right? Purists like us will say, no, don't do it. Why? Because it affects the drivers' championship. And let me tell you this, you're talking about this being a random thing that can impact things. How many races are there in a season where you get rain that causes the changing conditions, whether it's rain or something else that happens, an odd safety car or a red flag that changes things up? That usually happens a handful of races in the year anyway, right? Maybe I don't know how many you could chalk up. We'd have to go back and do some research on this, but between red flags or safety cars at inopportune times, one of which you will obviously remember going Abu Dhabi 2021. I'm just saying there are things that happen throughout the season that create
Yeah,
randomized results. So it's not like
but
this is
those
not happening anyway, too.
yeah,
The only argument is that okay, it's more natural or more random, and this just adds to it. What's wrong
yeah,
with
but
that?
the problem is that those things are random events. They aren't happening. Uh, they're outside of our control, right? But if you start to randomly just put a reverse grid in, that's when I think it would be
Okay,
unfair. And we had this
fine.
argument before as well. I think at the beginning of this rule set, F1 talked about that. This is Braun talked about uh, experimenting with different formats on race weekends. So we'd already had the sprint format um, put forward, and we were starting to do it. Ross Braun had suggested that we could use weekends to experiment, and the problem that most of the teams argued back was that if you do that, you will be affecting the drivers' championship and you will be affecting the constructors' championship, and both of those things have a direct impact on team revenue, team
Maybe.
salaries, championship bonuses, and
Yeah.
things like that. So
Okay.
that's why that becomes unfair.
Fair enough.
So,
But
so if you're going to do a reverse grid, I think you have to tell everyone that you're going to do a reverse grid. I think just putting it into a random weekend isn't going to work.
it's
It's
not
it's a
fun,
nice
man. It's
it's a
not
nice
fun.
pipe dream, sure. It's a nice pipe dream, but I think pragmatically it's not fair to do that.
No,
And
but
and
here's the
whatever
thing.
you
I'll push back on that, Chess. What if you let them know at the beginning of the year, we're going to have three
yeah,
weekends
yeah,
out of 24
But
when
you
this
don't
is
tell
going
them
to
which
happen.
weekends.
You don't
You
tell
don't
them
tell
what is
them
going to
which
happen.
weekends.
But now you
Ha
know, but as a racing team, you know, hey, look, there's going to be 3 race weekends. We have those anyway, right? Don't you have times where drivers DNF, you have a mechanical failure, those things happen. It's not
Wow.
unusual. I would be in for this unless you said, hey, we're going to have 12 out of the 24 races be reverse grid. Of course, you've lost me then. But 3, 4, okay, I could see that happening where it's like, all right, we add a little bit of magic to this, and let's see, Max, if you can't do
And
it on
who's
certain
who's
tracks, right? You wouldn't be able to do it on Monaco anyway. You wouldn't be able to do it in Singapore. You wouldn't be able to do it in Hungary. A couple others, but you can see tracks with Monza would be great, right? Hey, reverse grid. Oh,
Yeah,
that
I
would be
have to
great.
say, Ammar, this argument has gone beyond reverse grids into a territory that I wasn't expecting. So we're now
But
not just talking about reverse grids, we're talking about putting in a random format on a random
it's
race
part of the
weekend.
same argument, right? Because reverse grids by design, again, if you get back to the crux of the why, it's all about making the race weekend more exciting, right? And if you're in the camp of making a race weekend more exciting, then why not? All right, you go ahead and announce it ahead of time. If you do that though, then you start having teams jockeying for, like, I don't know how this exactly would work out in terms of qualifying. I mean, I could see Max not getting out of the garage on a qualifying weekend, so he
Yeah,
would be
but that's
that's
but
not
that's
that's
not
not how
how it
this
would.
works.
But that's not how it would
So then you
work,
do
right?
championship order, but that's fine. Even
Yeah,
that is a bit. I mean, what if you have a closed grid right now? I mean, you don't know that, right? So it's still pretty random. Whatever you're gonna do, right? Once you've taken the step of we're gonna tinker with the format, there's gonna be something that is thrown up that is odd, that is
but
unknown, that is out of the blue.
you're not tinkering with the format. You're tinkering with the race weekends that you're going to do
Look,
it at.
we started this season arguing whether the rule sets accomplished what they did. When we started this season, we said, look, the Formula One rule set, the last formula, it has kind of not done what it's intended to do, not because of what was conceived, but rather the teams did not adjust to it, right? 30, 12 races into it, whatever the number is, please don't correct me on that. Whatever the race, the number is, look at what this season has brought. And look, next season will be even more exciting. So just like you can say that, if I give you sprint weekends 3 years ago, you're going to tell me the same thing you're telling me right now. If I give you something to the effect of reverse grids, the first year is going to be probably a bit of a failure. But 2, 3 years into it, it'd be nice. Look, man, I have all kinds
Mm.
of ideas
I
with
still
reverse
don't like
grids.
sprint
Like,
weekends though. I still find them.
I would call it, like in baseball, they call it a magic at bat. Like I would let teams decide. I don't know how you do it. Like just call in to the call into the weekend, like right after qualifying,
Okay,
say boom, reverse
okay.
grid.
So I'm going to tell you why I don't want to do that. I'll tell you exactly why. My the whole point of a reverse grid is that it forces you to engineer your car differently, and you want the teams to engineer their cars differently for a reverse grid. This is why. When you've got when you've got a qualifying session where the whole point is to qualify your car at the front, your car is optimized to go as fast as possible. That's it. You just want it to be aerodynamically efficient. So you're quick on the straights and you're quick in the corners and you leave everybody else behind. Turbulent air is not a big issue to you. You don't care about all of the crap that's coming off the back of your car and how it's affecting everyone behind you. That's not your objective. It's just about making your car as fast as possible. Agree or disagree?
Agree.
Right? Because the ultimate objective of that is if you qualify your car at the front, you can then drive off into the distance. And again, at that point, you're not worried about what's coming off the back of your car and how it's affecting everybody else. You're waltzing off into the great blue yonder. You don't care. But for a reverse grid, when you're coming through the pack from the back, the objective changes and you want the cars to be engineered differently. You want them to be designed to overtake,
Sure.
right? You want them to be able to deal well in traffic. So coming back to your question about how these cars would do how the midfield would do, well, it depends on how good you are at engineering your car to follow
Perfect. Yeah.
and to overtake. But that only works, Amar, if you tell the teams the weekends that you're going to be doing that. If you
No,
don't,
you don't tell
all
them
that you'll
that.
end up is a
You don't.
procession. All you will end up with otherwise is a procession where the fastest cars can't get past the second fastest car because Max Verstappen will start the race behind Lando Norris, for
Yes.
example,
Yes.
but the pace difference in those between those two cars won't be enough to allow Max to get
Okay.
close. So all that will happen is that you'll get a
Sure.
little train of cars that go forwards through the slower cars, and then you'll end up with status quo at the
That
front.
is not guaranteed. Can I tell you why? You get that right now anyway. We've seen DRS trains, as in Belgium, we saw DRS trains happen. Nobody was able to overtake. So I agree with
That's
you.
based on the current engineering. So
I
if you
understand.
engineer your cars differently to
No, no,
actually
no.
follow and
Okay.
overtake, then
I
it
get
changes the equation.
the idea of having a reverse grid is to not allow for all of these things. If you're going to keep gaming the rules, then the person that is up front will always have that. The whole idea behind having a reverse grid is to jumble things up. That is the whole point of it. If you keep the element of surprise, that is when you get to see something that you haven't seen before. We will never get to see that otherwise. It would be interesting to see Max Verstappen being stuck behind Hulkenberg, not for 24 races, Shez, but only 2 or 3 races in the year. That's all it is. The ask is when
Yeah,
you're
so that
arguing
that's
that,
okay,
yeah,
but that
I
cheapens it
want
for
the
me.
element of surprise. Okay, and again, I don't know what the delta is between knowing and not knowing. Like, if you're going to get stuck behind a car, you're probably likely going to get stuck behind it, even if we told you that ahead of time. I don't want anyone to know that ahead of time because I want them to come prepared as is, and it is what it is. Max, go from 20th to first and go chase what would be Logan Sargent in P1. That would be
Okay, but
funny.
the
Let's
yeah,
go
but
do it.
it won't that won't be the race though. Getting past Logan Sargent isn't going to be the issue. The problem is going to be that he's not going to be able to get past the
Yes, he
next
can.
slowest car.
They can do pit stops. There's safety cars. You don't think something's going to happen up front
Okay,
when
but
when the midfield and the
but
backfield is,
I'm talking
there are
about
many
what you
things happening.
can. I'm talking about what you can control,
No,
right?
it's
And
not
if
about controlling. The whole idea is to take the control away from the teams. 3 weekends of the year, no control. It's all random. Go see. Let's go see. Do it.
yeah, I think you would end up with unintended consequences, and those consequences being that you
I
would
mean, we
just
end
get
up with that anyway. I mean,
a
unintended consequences of the last rule set were we had Max dominating for 2.5 years. There you go. Those are always going to be there. Even when teams knew the
yeah,
regulations,
but
they're
yeah,
not
Amar,
always going to be
but
able to
they're not
succeed.
unintended when you know they're going to happen. And I'm telling you that this is what will happen.
They're
And if
in
you still go ahead and do the same thing anyway, and then complain about the
no,
fact that
no,
you've had a
but
procession,
you don't know
then you can't
exactly what's
complain
gonna.
about the.
You don't. You're projecting. You don't know exactly what's gonna
But
happen.
this is a logical conclusion to what
No,
we are talking
no,
about.
no, no.
So
It's
if
not. It's
so,
not because
an unintended consequence is when you do something and you don't realize it's going to happen. But when I'm telling you this is probably what's going to happen, and
no,
you
but
do it
it's not.
anyway,
It's not. It's probable. Not 100%. There are probabilities for other things too. There's a
sure, nothing is
probability.
100%.
Exactly. So I could argue there's a probability that we will see Max, Lewis, Lando blaze through the field, and now they're going to have to overtake the likes of Hulkenberg, Alonso, Stroll, whoever else you want to put in that midfield while racing each other too. I think it would be great. It would be great for from the remaining 10 races for 2 or 3 of those to be that way because now you have to race not only the backfielders, but you also have to. And look, you can't do this over the sprint race weekend. I actually want to take that back because guess what? There are no pit stops in the sprint weekend.
Yeah,
In the
that's what
sprint
makes it
race,
good.
rather.
That's why it
Right.
makes it
So
perfect.
there's nothing there. There's nothing there to kind of help with this. But if you have the whole race, maybe it's a two-stopper race. You go to one of these tracks where you have to stop them. Interesting,
I would
interesting.
say,
You add some elements to it. It'd be
Amar,
really fun.
I would say that F2 and F3 do this already, where
Yeah, but it's not the same
where
thing. Yeah. And
no,
nobody
it's not the
watches
same.
F2
It's
or F3 because of that. The whole reason it's being done in F2 or F3 is because they want to see if they can do it in F1. And I would
correct, and they
argue
don't
as the
randomize the
American
days.
exactly. So that's why I'm arguing as the American consumer. I want to see a couple of these, even though the purist in me wants to have nothing to do with it.
I'm
two
with
or
you.
three weekends.
I definitely want reverse grids at some point. I think introducing them randomly in the middle of a season is unfair for
Amazing
the reasons that I've given you. One, that it throws us it can change the complexion of a championship challenge where it's hung in a balance
Three races.
when it's already an exciting championship battle to then randomly introduce this make adds a level of it's not fair. The second
It's
is
not fair
what.
for everybody. It's not fair for it's not like McLaren knows and Red Bull doesn't. It's unfair for just like they don't know if the rain is going to come or how heavy it's going to be. And we've seen how
Yeah,
those
but
things
that's
also
out.
can.
Yeah, but that's
Yeah,
outside of your control,
but
man. How do you?
This is God, Stefano Domenicali doing this. He's like, and look, man, we can
That's a
add
little
intrigue
bit.
to it.
That's a little bit like Bernie's idea of just sprinkling water onto a racetrack.
I love
But
that. Every once in a while,
yeah,
not like I said, within limits.
it's.
3 races is 1/8 of a season. No problem. Go have fun with it. Let's see how it works out. Now,
Oh,
if you tell me you're going to do it for 6 weekends, 12 weekends, then I agree with you because at that point, it kind of, for me anyway, it meets the threshold of like, okay, this is too much fun and too random. But 3 weekends, and look, we can decide how you want to call those weekends. Maybe you have a fan vote for it and say, okay, yeah, but none of the teams know, but fans have to vote, and then F1 just all of a sudden on the Saturday be like, reverse grid tomorrow.
wow.
That'll be
That
fun.
that sounds terrible. But okay. Okay, so that's the crux of our argument there. I think both of us agree that reverse grids are probably a good thing, right?
Mhm.
Like, take yeah, even if you're an F1 purist, that I can't see a good reason why this isn't a pure way of doing F1. So I think we both agree that reverse grids have have a place, and the purity argument isn't one I think that can be leveled against them. Where we're disagreeing at the moment, and maybe you guys can help us out, is should they just be introduced randomly with no warning to the teams? Ammar says
Yes.
yes. Shez says I'm not so sure about that. And we've given you our reasons for them. Have a look at the video. You'll see what they are. As usual, if you like what we're doing here, please like, please subscribe, please leave us a comment. What do you think? Should we have reverse grids? Should we be randomly introducing them into the season
Yeah.
to see what happens? Salt and pepper. Um, as usual, we read all the comments and we reply to as many as we possibly can, and we will see you guys in the next one.
Later.